I'd like to welcome all graduating students, their families, distinguished guests, friends, faculty, and staff to our departmental graduation ceremony. My name's Kathy Clarke. As chair of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, it is my pleasure to preside over this event. It is a great day to celebrate the accomplishments of the Chemistry and Biochemistry graduating class of 2017. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests who are present with us today. They are alumnus Dr. Sep Sarshar and his guests, who we'll be hearing a lot more about in a few minutes. UCLA alumni Bruce and Joy Morimoto, who are avid supporters of our department. And also with us today is Miguel Garcia-Garibay, Dean of the Division of Physical Sciences at the UCLA College. The official conferring of degrees in the graduate division and the college took place on Thursday and Friday. Today is our opportunity to bring together those of us in the UCLA community who are associated with the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, and to acknowledge and recognize the accomplishments of our graduating Bachelors of Science, Masters of Science, and Doctor of Philosophy candidates. As chair of the department, I congratulate you on joining a distinguished family of alumni. We hope you will continue to consider UCLA and our department your home away from home. We will be proud to count you as a chemistry and biochemistry UCLA Bruin for life. I also congratulate your families, the parents, grandparents, spouses, partners, sisters, brothers, daughters, sons, and other family members who have stood by you and supported you through the highs and lows of your studies. Let's give them a big round of applause. The program for our graduation ceremony is as follows. We'll begin with the presentation of the annual Alumni Award and the commencement address by Dr. Sep Sarshar. We will then confer graduate awards and then honor the PhD and master's candidates. And after that, we will award undergraduate prizes and honors. And finally, we'll recognize each of the bachelor's candidates. At this point, I would like to welcome Dean Miguel Garcia-Garibay to the stage to present the 2017 Chemistry and Biochemistry Alumni Award.
Salam, Baraz Surk Behir. Hello and good afternoon. That was my attempt of using Farsi to say hello, good afternoon. You'll know why in a moment. I want to thank you all for joining us for the Chemistry and Biochemistry commencement today. I am Miguel Garcia-Garibay, the Dean of the Division of Physical Sciences of the UCLA College. I am also a proud member of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I would like to thank Professor Clarke for hosting this wonderful event to recognize our graduate students. I would also like to congratulate her for being the first woman to serve as the chair of the department, and I'm honored to be her colleague. The department started the Chemistry and Biochemistry Alumni Award in 2012 to recognize the remarkable contributions our alumni have made to science and to society. Our Alumni Award winners are outstanding role models for our graduating students, and they make all of us at UCLA extremely proud. We have such a great history of distinguished alumni that there are many individuals who are deserving of this award, which makes the selection process all the more difficult and the selection itself so much more meaningful. It is my great honor to present the 2017 Chemistry and Biochemistry Alumni Award to Dr. Sep Sarshar. Dr. Sarshar received his Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry and applied mathematics from UCLA in 1989. He recalled, and I quote, "In my sophomore year, a chance meeting in a corridor of Young Hall with my undergraduate advisor, Professor Michael Young, changed my life. Professor Young suggested I consider switching my major from math to chemistry. And without giving it much thought, I said, okay." End of quote. Dr. Sarshar then went on to Harvard University, where his advisor was Nobel laureate E.J. Cody. He was awarded a Doctor of Philosophy degree in organic chemistry in 1994. Later on that year, he started his industrial career as a medicinal chemist at Ontogen, a San Diego startup that helped pioneer the field of combinatorial chemistry, and then he joined Pfizer in 1997. At Pfizer, he continued his research in the development of novel anti-angiogenic drugs. In 2001, Dr. Sarshar founded Auspex Pharmaceuticals, which was acquired in 2015 by Teva Pharmaceuticals for merely $3.5 billion. Auspex specialized in the application of deuterium substitution to known molecules with metabolitic liabilities, and the goal was to create novel therapies with the potential for improved safety and efficacy profiles. Its lead compound, SD89, or Austero, was recently approved by the FDA for the treatment of chorea associated with Huntington's disease, tardive dyskinesia, and Tourette syndrome. He is currently a principal at Peritus Partners, a commercial real estate development company, a family business that he has been involved in since he was a teenager. He took over the business in 2015 when his father retired. Dr. Sarshar has authored many papers and holds more than 100 patents. In his spare time, he enjoys traveling, surfing, skiing, and scuba diving. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Sarshar's family and friends who are in the audience today, sitting here in the front. His mother, Homa Sarshar, his father, Najat Sarshar, his brother, Human Sarshar, future sister-in-law, Angel Cetina, his girlfriend, Melissa Misetish, and her daughter, Bonnie Misetish, his godmother, Firuzeh Haeri, godbrother, Cyrus Sananjade, and childhood friend, Kambis Tiranachi. It is now my pleasure to invite Dr. Sarshar to accept this award and present the commencement address.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Miguel, for such a wonderful, introduction. I just wanted to make a small correction. Angel is my future brother-in-law, not sister-in-law. He's sitting right here in the front. But that's a common mistake. So I'll put my timer here. Ladies and gentlemen, Department Chair Kathy Clarke, Dean Miguel Garcia-Garibay, Dean Michael Jung, faculty members of the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, and most notably, you guys, the graduates of 2017. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with you today. I'm terribly humbled. And people who know me that I don't get emotional very often, but this is a very important moment for me. This is a very, very proud day for all of you, for your parents especially, and what an amazing gift for the pre-party for Father's Day coming up tomorrow, mine included right here. So I would like to ask everybody to give a big round of applause to your dads today. Now, speaking of parents, I've lived with a sense of what if ever since mine told me that I was mistakenly switched at birth in a neonatal ward. Yes, it's a funny story. So to make matters much more interesting, it took a few hours for the hospital staff to realize that this mistake had been made. And so for my poor parents, me being just barely out of the womb, I was already a headache for them already. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for agreeing to swap me for the other baby and raising a very moody chemist, which is not a very easy job. And I'm hoping that so far you've been satisfied with the return on your investment. Decisions, that's kind of the major theme of my talk today. You're going to be faced with a ton of them. You've already made a whole lot of them, but there's going to be more ahead of you. So how many times do any of us actually stop and think about how our life could change if we were going to opt for, let's say, a pizza versus a burger at lunch? The reality is most of us, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about that. And no matter how much time we spent thinking about the ingredients or what the calorie count is, at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is the flip of a coin. And there's a bunch of neurotransmitters in your frontal lobe that immediately tell you this is what you should be doing. So it was during the summer of my freshman year here at UCLA that all of a sudden my medical school genes turned on inside of me. And one of these electric impulses went off in my head, and I decided, oh, well, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. Okay, great. So I want to go to medical school. So as a result of that, I ended up spending the next 9 months in these lecture halls right back here. And I listened to Mike Jung, who's sitting right here among us, and a few other ones of his colleagues, give lectures and talk about orbitals and electrons and Diels-Alder reactions and you name it. And these lower division organic chemistry lectures and my one-on-one office hours that I actually spent a lot of time with Mike in his office asking questions and bothering him were so fascinating that the next quarter I changed my major to applied mathematics. So even though I never told my parents the real reason behind that, I just said, oh, by the way, I'm going to become a math major. The real reason was that I was lazy and math was really easy for me. And so all that it meant was less homework and more time for goofing off. So it was great, I think it was the best decision ever. But we need to fast forward a little bit. And just as Miguel mentioned in his introduction, I was walking by right here in the quad where we're all sitting, and I was heading to my car because I had to get to a basketball game, a pickup basketball game with a bunch of my friends over in the Dykstra dorms over here. And I decided my car was actually parked back here in parking lot 2. So I'm like, oh, instead of going around that way, I'll just go through here. And walking through, I end up on the 3rd floor, and who do I see? Mike Jung, who's always got this big smile on his face. He never stops smiling. It's amazing, this guy. And typical, starts yelling out from the other side of the hall. He remembered me. I mean, this is the one thing about Mike that I will never forget is his memory. I mean, I would go into his office and ask a question, and he would go, I think that was a paper in Jack's 1967, page 432. And you pull it up, and it would be right there. So, and I'm not kidding about this. So he goes, hey, Sep, how's it going? Long time no see. What the hell you been up to? And of course, I grinned back and I said, good to see you, Mike, and I started telling him about the fact that yet again, I changed my major and now I was a math major and life was really awesome and it couldn't be better. And he thought and he said, well, what the F are you going to do with being a mathematician? That's very typical Mike, right? And I thought about it and I didn't say anything and he goes, well, you've already taken so many chem classes because he's such a salesman all the time, right? Why don't you just take a few more? It's not a big deal. Just take a few more upper division classes. You can double major. It'll be fine. And I was late for the game, so I'm like, yeah, okay. And I ran off without even thinking about it. But, obviously because I said, okay, now I have to do this stuff. And so I went and enrolled, and the next thing I know, I'm sitting in an upper division class with another one of the professors who's no longer here, François Diederik. And I'm thinking to myself, why the hell did I not tell Mike to go fly a kite? But anyway, that was how this whole thing started. So it was a chance meeting here in this department. There was a little nudge and a clueless, nerdy undergrad who just had no idea, just spontaneously decided to say yes. And that whole thing initiated a chain reaction. And then 30 years later, there was the first deuterated drug that was ever approved, came to market. This is how important decisions are going to be in your life. The approval of this drug, which is named Austero, because it's a drug that is made for patients with Huntington's disease, it helps steady them because it lowers the amount of dopamine that is secreted in their brain. They get very, very bad shakes from Korea. The name actually kind of sounds like steady, so Austero. It was an incredible, colossal effort by a huge team of people, so I can't just stand here and take credit for any of it. But there are a lot of people who were either directly or indirectly involved, and I need to name a few of them because I think that will help you understand what happened throughout this decision-making process. The first one is Professor Jung, who is sitting right here among us, and he's the one who supported me and kind of pushed me to go to grad school. Next, it was Professor Corey at Harvard, who was my mentor and advisor there, who, I don't know if you guys may be too young to know about him, but there are a lot of stories about him in the chemistry circles. A very tough guy, very keen chemist, very smart guy, won the Nobel Prize in 1990, I apologize. 94 is when I graduated. And I really, really learned to pick out small details and things because it was, again, all about making the right decision, when to do it, when not to do it. I also at that time met a postdoc who shared the two-man lab with me by the name of Tom Gant, who years later ended up joining me at the company and who was actually the first one to suggest, hey, why don't we try deuterating drugs? So along the way, there were thousands of experiments. There were mountains and mountains of dirty glassware to wash, constantly. There were numerous bad decisions, and you'll be making a lot of those. I can guarantee you that if you stay in science. There's going to be a lot of bad decisions that you're going to make. There will be multiple failures. There's no two ways about it. If you're going to try to be a good scientist, you are going to fail. That is for sure. And it will happen over and over and over again. There are a lot of bruised egos, right? Because as scientists, we all have egos. We think we're very smart, but it turns out we're not. But there was one glimmer of hope amongst all of this stuff. So, as the company was moving along and we were going around trying to raise money and talking to people, trying to get deals, there were experts upon experts, dozens of them, except one person who's sitting right here, who kept saying, this is not going to work. Don't waste your time. The patents that you're writing, they can't be defended. Notice all the negativity, right? That your competitor has already raised $100 million and game is over. That there's no way that all these, interesting lab results are going to translate into the clinic. No way. It's never going to happen. The FDA, oh, yeah, forget about that. That's never going to happen. And, and guess what? So the theory behind this whole approach, in fact, was not created by me. This is something that was invented way back in the 1930s. It was right around the same time that a chemist by the name of Urey actually discovered deuterium. Another year later, Gilbert Lewis, who I'm sure you've all heard of him, was the first chemist who isolated heavy water, or D2O. And it was right around that time that a few scientists simultaneously worked on a derivative of a famous equation that all the undergrads here have probably heard of called the Arrhenius equation, which is basically a rate determining equation. You're talking about kinetics of reactions. And that equation basically postulated that compounds that contained hydrogens and deuterium reacted at different rates. Now, a lot of people didn't really understand what that meant back then or what the ramifications were. But today we know that this is a much more complex process than they originally thought it was. And applying deuteration to making drugs like we did at Auspex, in fact, can only make a difference if that difference in rate is significant enough that you can observe it on a certain scale. It is also not predictable, so you couldn't just sit here and say, oh, put a deuterium here, put a deuterium here. So what it meant was a lot of work, right? A lot of work to synthesize every single analog that we could get our hands on and to test every single one. So that's science, right? You got to have a lot of patience because a lot of stuff that you're going to make are never going to end up anywhere. It's going to end up in the garbage. But you cannot give up. That's the point that I'm trying to make. So prior to 2001, when the company started, there was a very small set of these drugs that were known that had been deuterated. Most of them were usually used for tagging, because you wanted to follow a certain drug in a metabolism. And there were a few reports, this drug showed a little bit of effect. Some, basically what I would call them academic anomalies. Somebody would write a paper because they found something in some experiment, and everybody kind of looked at it and said, oh, wow, that's interesting. So it became really clear when we were looking at the literature and reading the reports, and this is really important for you young scientists to notice, is that nobody had actually gone through and systematically looked at every single analog of existing drugs that had metabolic liabilities. I mean, it was just a gaping hole. And on top of that, it became very clear right away that nobody had ever tested this in man. All the experiments that were out there were either in test tubes or there was a couple of animal studies, but nobody had ever put it into man. So that was, of course, all about to change. And in 2006, we were a very small team, 5 people, in a company in the outskirts of San Diego in a lab. Nobody had heard of us. All we had was an abstract idea. We had a bunch of patent applications out there pending, and we had reams of data that we had collected. And that's all we had. We were really short on cash because, the pharmaceutical business just burns cash like there's no tomorrow. It's not like, oh, I'm going to create a new app. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a drug. And this was a small startup company that I had started with some family money and a few friends who had invested money in the company, so it was not that easy. So among the drugs that we had, the analogs that we had made, one specifically at the time stood out. It was a deuterated analog of an antidepressant called venlafaxine, which was sold at the time by Wyeth, a company that, by total randomness, Mike used to also consult for. So here's Mike again in the story. And sorry about this. In one of my discussions with Mike later on, it turned out Mike told me that he had specifically told Wyeth, chemists at Wyeth, hey, why don't you guys try to deuterate, some of your compounds, because you might be able to do something with the metabolic liability. Of course, nobody gave a crap, right? They didn't want to listen to him because who's this fool talking to us? We know what we're doing. So anyway, replacing 9 of the hydrogen atoms on venlafaxine gave us this new compound that we called SD254. And we had been able to double the half-life in vitro. So this was just a test tube test that we had done. And now we needed to show that, there's some human activity with this, but how could we do it? We barely had money to make it to the next day. So back in grad school, and again, this is now another thing for you young scientists who are going to be going to grad school, reading papers is a very important thing, and I'll tell you why. And I spent a lot of time because I was working on a project with another grad student who at the time was actually working on a new synthesis of fluoxetine, which is Prozac. Everybody's heard about this. So it was another antidepressant. And through my readings, I got interested and I started reading some papers by this chemist by the name of Alexander Shulgin. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Alexander Shulgin or not. He died a few years ago. But him and his wife, Anne, back in the 70s, worked in their garage making drugs, sort of psychedelic drugs, but they were looking for antidepressants. And what they were doing is they were trying it on themselves. And it turned out that in the early 70s, Alexander Shulgin found MDMA, which everybody knows is ecstasy. So Shulgin, yeah, I knew that was going to draw some attention. So Shulgin ended up going to the the neuropsych community and telling him, hey, this is a great drug. You guys should be using this. It helps a lot of people. And anyway, you know the rest of the story. So while I was reading these papers, and imagine, at the time I'm in my early 20s, I'm like, who's this whack job that's, making drugs and taking drugs and what's going on over here? And then all of a sudden, it became very clear to me because we had this drug, we had to get it into man, we didn't have enough money, same situation as Shulgin. What do we do? So a lot of deliberation with the team, and a decision was made. I volunteered, and I said, I'll take the drug. And everybody's looking at me like, are you crazy? I'm like, no, don't worry about it, it's fine. So one of the guys in the lab by the name of Dr. Soon, who's a great medicinal chemist, made the drug. I specifically helped him purify it, just to make sure. I also took all the spectra, just to make sure. And in the morning, on an empty stomach, took about 20 milligrams of it with orange juice and started collecting data. So how do you collect data? So you use these little, in real clinical setting, that's not how it's done. You actually have to get tapped and they take blood, but we couldn't do that. So there was no doctor on the staff. So we use these little finger prick needles that diabetic people use to take a little bit of blood to check their sugar. So we do that, take some blood at given times. And I spent all day peeing into an Erlenmeyer flask because we had to keep the urine, and I had to keep it in my fridge at home. So, okay. And I'll tell you one thing. I am just absolutely amazed as how much urine can come through a person in 24 hours. But that's a whole different story, and we won't get into that right now. Anyway, the next morning, we had a very brave young, well, he wasn't that young. He looked young, but he really wasn't young. Taiwanese analytical chemist in the lab by the name of Dr. Long, and he was actually quite short, but we call him Dr. Long. But that was really his last name, it was Long. And, he got into the process. He had to process my urine, and he had to process my blood and all that kind of stuff. And the results came back, and they pretty much matched, they corroborated what we had in our in vitro studies. So that was obviously N of 1, and I know everybody's going to say, well, that's one data point. So we sat down and we talked some more, and because I hadn't died, over the last 24 hours, everybody got a little bit more confident. They're like, well, we need more data points. And I said, okay, fine. And so we proceeded to do a few analogs, a number of data points, and we ended up being able to put together a really nice slide for the investors with structure-activity relationship that showed, hey, this works in the lab, it works in man, what do you say? Well, at that point, we thought that, oh, yeah, this is all done, and we ended up getting our first round of financing, but the real work really, really had just begun. We had a competitor that had raised a buttload of money, a lot of money, right? Small company, all the guys in that company are, ex-big pharma executives, and they had tons of connections. So again, we're here, the underdog, and, couldn't count ourselves out, right? I think you're kind of hearing a theme in this discussion right now, right? And to make a long story short, because I know we're short on time, and that's my 20 minutes is up, and I'm going to finish this in just a second. It took another 10 years after that point. So this was already in 2007. It took another 10 years. The company went through 4 CEOs. 4. I'm not kidding you. We did an IPO that was very successful in 2014, and it only took the acquisition in 2015 so that we could push the drug to market because of how difficult and expensive all this stuff is. So, at the end of the day, we were able to get a drug to market that helped people, that helped reduce the side effects of the existing drug that was on the market. That was the whole point of this exercise. It wasn't just to develop another drug, but it was to help people. And we were able to do that because we were able to reduce the dosage of the drug, and the reduction in side effects followed. So that was a major ordeal that everybody had said, oh, this is never going to happen. So if somebody ever tells you, don't waste your time, this is never going to happen, you tell them, I told them to go fly a kite. So I've told you a little bit about the power of deuterium and the power of decision-making in your life. It's probably the most important tool that you have at your disposal. It's your decision-making process. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do something. Because every single one of you here, you have everything that it takes to make something happen. It doesn't have to be starting another company. It could be something else. But I'm sure you can do it. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind because you all have the tools. All it takes is a little bit of faith in yourself, a lot of patience, and it's going to happen. So, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address you today. Have a wonderful day. Kick some ass.
Thank you, Dr. Sarshar. That was inspirational.